podcast.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a
Podcast.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and
Podcast.
and I'm all out of bubblegum.
All right, in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, welcome to Get to the Podcast. That's Get to the Podcast with the number 2. I'm Tiago de Souza.
I'm Nick Gambino.
And I'm Neil Carson.
Is that a dying monkey or a Bruce Lee impersonation? Jesus! I'm gonna get a fucking aneurysm.
It's like some crazy squirrel or raccoon in here getting ready to attack somebody.
Be like water.
Be like water.
Yeah, I love that.
Water
quote.
takes
That's a great
Oh,
quote.
such a great quote. Yeah.
When you see him, Bruce Lee, in
Dragon,
interviews,
the
he's
Bruce Lee
incredible.
story.
Water's
If
hot
you
as rock.
didn't know.
Oh yeah, did that movie come
Water
out?
could smash through any
Yeah.
rock. Oh, the
Bruce Lee movie?
Dragon,
yeah,
the Bruce Lee
Legend
story.
of yeah, whatever that.
Dragon, the Bruce Lee
Oh
story.
no, Dragon the Bruce Lee story from '93 is one of my fucking favorite movies of all time. That is such.
That's
a
what you're
good
quoting,
film.
right?
Rob.
No,
he does. No, he does quote it in that movie,
He's
but
like,
it's actually
"Oh."
it's originally from an interview with Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
He goes, water can crush any rock, but it can take any form. You know, like it's that whole
You
thing.
sound just like him
Yeah.
from Dragon. That's what I'm saying.
I could
Okay.
do that. Yeah, I could because I've seen that movie
Even
so many times. and-
he even talks fast, man.
yeah, he does.
That guy's ridiculous.
Ooh,
That guy's
wait.
ridiculous.
He's so good. But Dragon
You
the Bruce
start-
Lee story is so beautiful.
Yes.
It's
Have
such
you-
an aesthetic movie.
It's funny. I remember growing up hearing all this hype about Bruce Lee. I was like, "Oh, Bruce Lee," like my uncle and shit. And I'm like, "All right, whatever. He's just some guy who knew karate, who gives a shit."
Yeah.
And then I started YouTube. The advent of YouTube happened, and all these video clips of him at actual
Real,
demonstrations,
yeah.
real
Yeah.
tournaments,
One
and
inch
things
punch
like that.
and-
yeah,
yeah.
all that shit started to get uploaded by people who had all these random clips, and
Yeah.
I'm like, because I'd only ever seen him in a couple random
Movies.
high-profile movies, and I'm like, he's just
Enter
an
the Dragon.
actor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I start seeing him just doing these fucking nutso demonstrations where people are flicking, he's what was it? Somebody, he had nunchucks and people were flicking matches at him and he was hitting, striking the matches with the nunchuck or something.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what the fuck?
Right.
How is he hitting it so that it strikes? And it was just the guy's just throwing matches. And
I've
they're,
never seen that.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. That's
He's
crazy.
just lighting them on
crazy.
fire,
Yeah.
with the fucking nunchuck.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is some sight. And the guy was 10 feet or 15 feet
That's
away.
crazy.
He wasn't even close. He was tossing him in the air. And it was
He was
dark. There was
incredible.
a spotlight on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After I watched Dragon, I went to look for that fight where he beat the guy in 60 seconds.
Yeah, 60 seconds or less. He
Yeah.
challenged. He was in the middle of a not dojo, in the middle of a ring with all these karate
Yeah.
and martial arts people around, and it was he was giving a speech or whatever, and he was in a suit, and he's talking about Jeet Kune Do, which is the martial arts form that he created, which was it was about having no style, adapting to styles, not having rigid forms, which all martial arts were based on at that time. And he goes, and everybody's booing him and yelling at him. And
Yeah.
he goes, "You don't believe me? I'll beat anybody in here in 60 seconds or less." And he challenged them. They're laughing at him. And then one guy goes, "I fight him. I beat him once. I beat him again." Because he broke his back earlier in the movie.
Yeah.
This was in Dragon, the Bruce Lee story.
Oh, yeah.
No.
I thought this
But-
was a real
no,
thing.
but
And I was I
based
need to
on
watch
true
it.
It's
events.
a real event. It really did
But
happen,
it wasn't
though.
filmed.
It's based on the true
Did-
event.
There is a thing.
video.
There's a video, and I think the video back then was so shoddy
Yeah.
because this is the 60s and
Yeah.
the early
It was
70s.
actual film.
Mainly 60s. Yeah, it was actual film, and a lot of it was
tape or
black and white,
something,
and it's
yeah.
just been degraded over time. So a lot of these films are pretty shit. But yeah, he beat this guy in 60 seconds or less, and he just would do crazy shit. There's definitely things where legend and myth kind of go a little bit too far, where it's not actually the guy, but he was able to do. If you look at a lot of his films, other than Enter the Dragon, let's be honest, and Bruce Lee fans are probably going to shit on me for saying this, but those films are not great. They're not very well done.
If
They
you're
were
if
very
you're a
low
martial
quality.
artist and you watch these films, you can appreciate it from that sense. And it was at the time,
Yeah.
it was there weren't films like that.
No.
In America at least.
Yeah, but they're all done in Hong Kong. They weren't American films. They didn't even. Most of them didn't come to America. Those films weren't actually brought to the U.S. until after he died. Because Enter the Dragon, which was a Warner Brothers film, was the only American film he actually ever did, where he was a star. And so he did all these movies, and they actually were very low quality. If you go back and watch them, even for the time, they just compared to the U.S. system.
It's a style. It's this grindhouse 70s, 60s, that
Yeah.
transition from the 60s into the 70s. It was this style of filmmaking that
Yeah.
was visceral and dirty and unpolished, and there was something appealing.
I mean, there was like a lot
it.
of. It was pretty bad, but my point being
It's
is
like
not
shotgun.
that the
It was
movies
like a shotgun film. It was
Yeah.
like, fuck it, just edit that shit
It
together.
really
Let's make it.
was.
It was like the Canon films. It was like
so
how
Canon
all of their
films
films
was
are.
inspired by the exploitation films of the 70s. But
They
no,
made-
if you
yeah, that-
look at those films, and my point is not that they're shit, because yes, their quality is terrible, but Bruce Lee shines in those movies. He's so excellent in those
And it's
films.
unfortunate that he wasn't connected to like more
Until right before he died.
Yeah, better
Enter the Dragon
directors,
came
better
out 2
producers,
weeks
yeah.
after he died.
Yeah.
He never got to experience the fame of Bruce Lee. Like, he was big in Hong Kong.
Is that the one where they
Exactly.
have
Yeah,
like
that's
the
the thing. He
face,
never really
the
did,
face
yeah.
cut out?
No,
No,
that's
no.
fucking Jesus Christ.
Game of Death.
That
or
was
something?
Game of Death. That was the bullshit Game of Death. Okay, well, let's back up and talk about what this episode's about, because it's not about Bruce Lee, but we will get into this a little bit more in a second because it ties into it. But we're going to be talking about the evolution of action films and
Yes.
action stars, right? Because it's come a long way since, well, I mean, obviously you have film going back to the turn of the 20th century, but if you go into really this 50s, you know, where
Charlie
you have
Chaplin
Western
is
six-
like, kind of
Charlie
like
Chaplin,
action.
yeah.
Charlie
Exactly.
Chaplin's kind of an action.
Who was the guy?
Buster Keaton.
Buster
Buster
Keaton.
Keaton.
Was doing,
And
that was some
Harold
crazy
Lloyd.
shit.
Dude.
Love
Buster
them.
Keaton was doing some
And Harold
nutso
Lloyd.
shit.
Harold Lloyd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, is this real?
Harold Lloyd was
Is
the
this
one
real?
hanging
This
out.
looks
No,
dangerous
I think
as
you're
shit.
thinking of Harold.
I still remember
Harold
the
Lloyd
train
hanging
movie
off the.
with Buster Keaton. Yes.
Yes, but Harold Lloyd hanging off the clock.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
there was,
yeah.
and there was the skyscraper beams going up on the big crane, and he's fucking hanging on to it.
Wait, are you like, did he really do this?
This
shit?
was a lot of this shit was real because you didn't have any way to fake it
So
to
the-
look that good back then. There were certain little things that
Yeah.
were tricks sometimes, like for instance the clock one. I
Yeah.
think it was done with an erect set on a rooftop, so it looked like, and it shot it in a way that you couldn't see the roof beneath it. So he was hanging off, but there was just like the little drop right beneath him
Yeah.
onto
Yeah.
the roof. But besides that, there's a lot of shit that he would do, like the skyscraper beams, walking along the fucking unfinished skyscraper, stuff like that. That was real. This guy, I think he got like a couple of his fingers chopped off and like.
So a lot of it was green screening back then was actually paintings on a movie cell,
Yeah, and then they would.
and then they would film over that cell.
Yeah.
So when, like, say the clock tower, when it look down and you see the city, that was actually painted on.
Not in that film, but yes, that was a thing they did in
Yeah.
films back then. Not that particular one was not
The
done that
scene
way.
down,
That
I
was
thought it
really
was
the
paint.
city. That's what was crazy about it because it looked
Oh,
so
okay,
real.
all right.
Harold Lloyd's films and his stunts were specifically like considered amazing because of how real they were, because they were real. They weren't
That's
using
right,
any
yeah.
of those things. What you're talking about is absolutely a
Yeah, I'm
process
talking more
they used.
what was used. Charlie
Chaplin probably used some of that.
No, he used a lot
Yeah.
of it. Buster Keaton used a lot of it.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was a lot of how they started the process.
Yes,
of
totally.
getting
But
to
some of
green
these
screen.
guys, Harold Lloyd, even Buster Keaton sometimes, were doing things that were real and they were crazy and they were stunts and they were doing it because they wanted to be stars and that's
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was one of these things. It was like this transition from, I mean, to go super early on the evolutionary line. It was like, if you lived out in the Midwest or you lived away from a major city, you lived away from like Broadway or something like that, like that, you would go to like some sort of like traveling circus where you would see action,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden film came along, silent film, and you saw guys like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd and doing these like silent films with all these crazy in these cities that you had never visited.
Yeah.
And it just evolved from there. And the next thing you have Bruce Willis was
Yeah.
the next leap. That was the leap from.
Yeah.
That's the leap.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing in between. Nothing in between.
Charlie
Nothing
Chaplin
in
and
between.
Bruce Willis.
Let's just skip the 50s, 60s, 70s. And
No, because there's
80s
stuff to
and-
talk about in there, but you just like Die Hard's the pinnacle of
Yeah.
action films.
Once
No.
we reached Die Hard, you could only go down from there, so nothing has actually touched Die Hard.
No, but what's the Matrix? But
That's true.
But let's back up.
It got close.
Yeah, but let's back up for a second because like Charlie Chaplin's Gold Rush. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
There's that scene
Love
in the cabin, and it was like really on this big cabin set that they built that they were shaking, and he was like caught in an avalanche.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the fucking house was rocking this way and that way, and he's sliding,
Yeah.
and things are crashing, and it's this crazy scene, and it was done in camera with this big set. And so that was action at the time.
That was-
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But then if you just progress past that jump a number of years, obviously started evolving.
There were all these
more and
genres that
more.
started to come
and you have
on, and
noir
we had-
films,
yeah,
and you had
film
your
noir, the
Humphrey
westerns.
Bogart, westerns, 50s. You had
Dramas,
westerns,
yeah.
60s. Still there were
Well, you
westerns.
even had westerns prior to around Charlie Chaplin.
Oh yeah. There's
I mean,
westerns was a
Westerns
popular
makes
thing.
sense. Like it didn't actually hit me until I watched.
You were a few years removed from all these.
Yeah, a little bit. But like, when I watched what is that movie? Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell.
Oh, Tombstone.
Tombstone. I watched Tombstone. When Tombstone ends, it's like it says that what's his name lived until like 19 whatever and
20 something, 30
yeah,
something.
like Roy Rogers, or was it Roy Rogers and like
Wyatt
they were like friends with Wyatt Earp before he'd passed on, and I was like, God, can you imagine like going from like Wyatt Earp's time to then Wyatt Earp like
It
overlapping
so
into
quickly.
the world of like film and television, which was non-existent
and
his
in
entire
like real
life.
cities with like
major cities instead of small like Midwest towns and like
over 30-40 year period, it literally went from that concept of
the Wild West to
modern
like,
modern technology, modern cities and stuff like that.
And I was like, holy crap, like that transition happened, and there were people in Hollywood that knew Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
Because he lived till he was like 90 or something. Like that's crazy.
He lived to old age, yeah.
And so I was like, holy shit, like no wonder there were so many Westerns. I mean, there was so much homage to like a time period that had just existed that people were still had still grew up in.
Yeah.
Were still
Now
alive.
it's so far removed
that
it
feels disconnected. Yeah.
So Young Guns 2.
Yeah.
Thank you. I thought that's what you were saying. So Young Guns 2, it was this it was obviously a sequel to Young Guns, but it's this concept, it's this idea that Billy the Kid didn't die when he was killed by Pat Garrett, which is the idea he was killed like 20 years old, 19 years old or whatever, by Pat Garrett, which was his friend and who then became a sheriff and killed him. And it was this idea that what if he didn't die and he actually, Pat Garrett, who was his friend before, let him go and he went into obscurity and lived into the 1950s, because there was this old man, it's actually like two different people who claimed to be Billy the Kid in the 50s. And they lived that long and they were old, and some, this evidence that they may have been one or two or, one or the other were.
It was almost like legend.
Yes,
like there were these characters that were created that were like real people, but their like lives had become legend. And it was like they weren't legend. I mean,
they were just normal people. He's a bank robber who killed some people.
Yeah, it was
but
like
Young Guns 2. Emilio Estevez played Billy the Kid, and in the second one, he it starts off with
him as an old man.
Yes, in the 1950s, and this guy drives out in his car to meet him, and it's like totally 1950s.
Yeah,
and he goes and meets this old man. And the old man is Billy the Kid, and then it ends with him kind of wrapping up the story. He tells the story of the movie and how he lived and stuff like that. And it's really interesting, especially because it's very different from the first Young Guns, which didn't touch upon that concept at all. In the second one, they were like, let's take this real-life story about this guy claiming to be Billy the Kid and tie that into this movie.
Beautiful film.
Yeah, so it's really good. So anyways, that is the concept. That would have been Billy the Kid in the Wild West, and then, sticking around until they were like McDonald's and fucking driving cars. And
it's like...
Concrete
it blows my mind,
street,
like that how rapidly everything changed in a short amount of time.
Society changed,
Yeah, so they were doing westerns.
Guys are like literally riding horses, just murdering each other left and right. Like, and it was like, you had like one sheriff, maybe a couple of deputies, that would maintain peace. But like, if it was like a town with one sheriff and you killed somebody, you could get away with it.
True.
Right off into the sunset.
What are you planning, Neil?
Huh? No, I'm just saying it's like, there wasn't any kind of like nationwide like punishment or like, repercussions for your actions.
Right.
I think like back then, like
time.
if we shouldn't dig too deep into this, but I think society was so separated. There wasn't like what we have today. We could see everything.
Oh yeah.
It was so separated. Like the, people who had money, who lived in a more proper society, didn't have to deal with that a lot. And more people who were living in the, lower society had to deal with that a lot.
It's
so
true.
there's a lot of separation. So
westerns were a very big part of the action. Yeah. They were the action genre practically for the long time. Those and gangster films, right? But like you had the Squaw Man, which Cecil B. DeMille made like 3 times. He made that same movie 3 times. Yeah. And it was always the same story, but it was a western film, and they were popular, and that started from like 1914. He made the first one until 1931. So there were decades worth of these films, and they really hit their kind of like very actiony. They were always action, but the 60s / 70s with Clint Eastwood coming around, and then you always had John Wayne.
The spaghetti westerns.
Spaghetti westerns.
A little bit different, because they were all shot in Italy. None of them were shot.
Sergio Leone did a lot of those.
Yeah.
They're great movies.
They are
so different.
But you also had like
American
Sam Peckinpah in the States. He was doing them as well, but they were grittier.
Yeah.
They took this polished look and this very. Let's be honest. A lot of those westerns were very anti-Native American. They were always like savages, and in those films.
I mean, that was like the reality at the time.
That-
though.
that
was the
was the
mentality
reality
of
at the time.
It was
it
the
doesn't mean
mentality
it was
of the general
real. It was
public.
their
Yeah,
mentality
no,
at the time.
no.
Yeah, more than it was a
And
reality.
then in retrospect, people look back and are like, we did kill a lot of innocent people who didn't deserve to die.
we
So
took the territory like as
maybe-
if it wasn't already claimed.
Yeah, so they were like, "How do we do this film and make us look like the?"
But
good
they were
guys?
we took
basically.
territory that was already claimed,
Yeah.
and we pretended like, why are these people attacking us? Like, you're literally encroaching. It's like if I walked into your house and started fucking eating your food and raping your wife and kids, and you're like trying to hit me. I'm like, Jesus, the savage is just coming at me with knives and guns.
It does make you wonder who the actual savage
Who's the
was.
bad guy, right? Anyway, so
all this is based on a true story called America.
Yeah, exactly.
We did come steal the land.
seriously, America, the story. But so okay, in the
So
60s,
good they got their casinos. So
yeah. So
Oh,
you had
wow.
you had westerns and you had
It's okay. I can
That's
say
fucked
that
up.
I'm part Native American. I actually have two different
Yeah,
Native
make sure
American.
you got
clarify
so
that.
much in you that you could literally say anything and
I'm
wouldn't
part,
technically
I'm
be
part
offensive.
Delaware Indian, so it's all right.
You part of Della everything.
It's true.
I don't
do
even
got
know
a
what
little
that
bit of
means.
everything in me.
Della everything.
So I'm
Okay.
good. I can say anything I want.
Yeah,
So we had
I should actually get a stake in some of these casinos.
You
Anyway.
should.
you should.
I think legally I can.
Can you reparations?
I should look into it.
You should try.
You also 40
Isn't it
acres
like-
and a
it's
mule.
only 116.
40 acres and a mule.
They're not. They haven't.
They never.
Nobody
they're
got
not- Yeah, nobody got.
Nobody
It's also a lot. I mean, okay, that's fucked up. But I'm like, holy shit, 40 acres and a mule. If everybody, every
If that was actually delivered.
God,
to
state-
that'd be crazy. That'd probably be like
That'd be
at
Texas.
this point with the amount of
yeah.
African
There would be no
Americans.
Back
then, it was
probably
more
the country
reasonable,
at this
but-
point, which is
yeah.
like, yeah, just give them the fucking country after what we did. Anyways, okay, so
I'll take money.
we were big. So yeah.
invest it in Bitcoin. Anyway,
That's how they're gonna give it. The reparations 40 bitcoins.
That's okay. Just last joke. The Indians came up with the Bitcoin thing. They're trying to get us back.
that's
There you
true.
go.
That's true.
There
They're
you
just
go.
gonna like
Hey.
build the market to like 10 trillion.
Native
and then just
Americans.
pull
Why
all
are
their
people
money
still
out.
calling them Indians? I don't understand that.
Because they look like because we thought
I
we
know
landed
why.
in India. That's why.
Or the West Indies. Oh, yeah, India.
I say we, but it was really that idiot Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. So, and then we were like, you're Indians. They're like, we're not. India's like all the way at the other side
Even
of the
Native
fucking
American is a misnomer because America is a name that was given to the entire region.
world. Right, but
by
we didn't know the
Christopher
language, so
Columbus.
if you were to convert, you were to you have to make a word for this language.
No, they
The
told us what
indigenous
each
people
all
that
those
were here
tribes were
prior
all
to
for
wildly
the whole
different.
land, the whole connected land. It's not a disconnected land. You have to give that whole mass of land some name, and you might as well just do it in our language. Let's call it America.
Well, the Indians, I don't know why I'm calling them Indians. The
them
natives, just say
Native
natives.
Americans.
The natives.
Native Americans.
Indigenous
Natives.
people.
The
Indigenous
indigenous
people.
Indigenous people.
didn't give it a name.
Right.
It was Earth.
They didn't know there was such thing as a
Wow.
Basically,
beyond-
the language
We don't
was-
know
that.
how big it was.
We don't know. You know, what you should watch. This is a total tangent, and I'm sorry
It's
that
a
I have
major
derailed
tangent.
the entire podcast. But
Typical Neil.
Ken Burns did an amazing, like 8-hour,
He's amazing.
8-hour documentary on Native Americans and this, the basically the history of Native Americans from like whatever it is. Like,
Jesus Christ, Diego! That's like fucking 5
Three.
sneezes.
That's three.
and it's mainly from like it's I want to say he goes all the way back to like the 1600s when the Spaniards came over
Yeah.
and it started to interact with like in Mexico and stuff like in the different tribes down there, and then he just goes through like almost every tribe,
Really?
and
Wow.
it's crazy.
He's
I
an
mean,
incredible documentarian.
you have to
like,
be. It's like 8 hours long, so you have to be able to
they're all
like
bit-
endure.
yeah.
Our
If
history
you
is
can't
fucked
handle
up.
like documentaries,
Well, it's not
then,
technically
Yeah,
mine.
but Ken Burns, yeah, I'll watch anything Ken Burns does. He's incredible.
I watched that and I was like just floored at like how much we actually. I didn't know there was that many tribes and like they were so wildly different different beliefs, different languages, different everything.
It's like different countries.
They even
This is
looked
more your history than-
significantly different. Like
This is more your history than both of ours.
yeah.
Because I'm from Brazil and you're from some other place.
New York.
Italy,
And I'm half Italian.
history.
I'm half Italian.
Italy.
Yeah, my grandparents, great grandparents.
Yeah.
Off the boat.
Mamma,
Ellis Island.
mamma mia.
Mamma mia. Making some pasta for zoo, huh?
All right, we very much derailed
All right.
this podcast.
So, what
from
were we
action
talking
to
about
pizza.
before? So
I'm at a place that I have
oh, we
to
were talking about the.
I know what we're talking about.
We're
I'm
talking
trying to
about-
get the sentence out for 45 minutes. Talking about.
We're talking about
the indigenous
Western
tribes.
movies. That's how we got on Native Americans.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
It wasn't
All
a
right.
complete tangent.
Moving
but it
on.
So then 5 goes west.
Jesus Christ. Which was not a Disney
Back
film.
to the Future 3. And Maverick.
Unforgiven.
Those are the top and Unforgiven.
Maverick. Holy shit, I love Maverick.
Unforgiven,
Okay, back up. Rewind. Okay, so we were doing mobster films, gangster films, and westerns, and this is also what was dominating TV by the 50s, right? These kind of shows.
Detective
Lone
films.
Ranger.
Oh, yeah.
all that type
Yeah.
of stuff. Okay, and even like Superman was only battling like gangsters and mad scientists and whatever.
Batman,
and Native Americans.
Batman had TV
I'm just
shows.
kidding. Yeah,
serials,
Batman. Yeah, serials. Okay, so then we move into like the 60s, and what do we get in that year? Bond films.
Bond films,
Which starts this whole new concept. I mean, spy concepts have been around, but Bond kind of completely changed the genre, you know, and added this whole other... It basically created the spy genre, which was, you know, subgenre, which is kind of a subgenre of thrillers, actions, whatever.
I feel like spies weren't portrayed particularly as like good guys. You know
I'm
what
sure
I'm
they
saying?
were, because there's probably a
They
very
were more portrayed as a
pro-American...
mysterious figure instead of good or bad guys. Because
We had a very pro-American sentiment before that in the 40s. And I'm sure there was some degree of that.
Well,
I can't think of an example off the top
Bond's
of my
not
head.
particularly pro-American.
He's not
but
American. He's
that's what
British.
I'm saying. I
That's
know.
British,
That's what I mean, though. But
Felix was
that
was
always
CIA.
threw me off. I was
Felix
always
character.
like, why are we rooting for this guy? Like, this guy could like decide that America's evil and like murder Americans.
Yeah,
Like he could be a terrorist.
right.
Because he chose Daniel Craig to portray him.
Sean Connery could decide that like we're bad and just start murdering all Americans any chance he gets.
He wasn't a superhero, man.
It wasn't,
I mean,
His
basically,
weakness was vagina. Come on.
literally if he karate chopped you, you were dead. So,
Well, hey, okay, so
Says which film?
let's talk about it. So this is action. These are the action films of the 60s, a style in which would never work today. But in 1962...
it worked in Austin Powers.
As a joke, as a parody. But in 1962, the first real Bond film comes out, Dr. No.
Yeah.
Right? Which was great. And it was a young Sean Connery. I mean, he looked awesome. You go back, such a classic look.
And you guys still haven't seen Darby O'Gill and the Little People, right? With
No.
Sean Connery. He's good.
Yeah,
in that. You should watch it.
I should watch that. So, anyways, he's doing all these Bond films, right? So those were big in the 60s. But that became a lot about gadgets and crazy stuff when Roger Moore took over as well. Roger Moore and James Bond, a lot of very gadgetry. What we look back on now is pretty hokey, and at the time was slightly hokey, but that was kind of part of it, you know? But there was this other thing that happened around the time in like the late 60s, early 70s, which were these Western films we were just talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it was a reinvigoration.
John Wayne.
Well, there was John Wayne, but like if you really, as Rooster Cogburn in True Grit.
True Grit,
and then
yeah.
the Rooster Cogburn movie. I think they had another one just called that. He was great in that, and that was kind of slightly later.
Then he became
John Wayne.
president.
That was Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan was also an actor.
He was. Bedtime for Bonzo.
I haven't seen any of his films though.
I watched, I think, Bedtime for Bonzo. But anyway, so the real action, these Clint Eastwood movies. So
What's interesting because Clint Eastwood was like he was more like this like machismo, like he was like this like man, but like I feel like there wasn't a lot of
Action.
physical action. It was like he would shoot guys, yes.
Yeah, there was some punching.
maybe a
and-
hand, like a few times, but
he
it
had
was
to outwit them if you think about it. For I
like
think it was
Bond
for a few dollars more.
Bond would shoot like way less than he would punch.
Yeah, I don't know if his
Bond
films
was like
were the
more
one
like
that-
punching you out and then keep moving on his mission, but like Clint Eastwood would just be like, "Get out of my way," and he'd be like, "No," and he's
I
like,
think
It was
the-
about because he was a gunslinger.
Yeah, I think the film that will reference
And he was a man with no name.
Yeah, reference
That was
more into the action of westerns would be the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Well, that's the third. There was a Dollars trilogy. Is what that's called. You had A Fistful of Dollars, which was his first one, and then For a Few Dollars More, which was the second one, and then you had The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Lee Van Cleef was in the second and third one.
Yeah.
He was a good guy in the second one, kind of a bad guy. He was the bad in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The good was Clint Eastwood. The bad was Lee Van Cleef, and the ugly was Eli Wallach. Yeah. Anyways, but those movies. And Sam Peckinpah movies, which were he was another director of a lot of these westerns, and then you had Sergio Leone did a lot of those movies we just said, and he also did Once Upon a Time in the West.
Yeah,
all these movies brought a grit. I mean, that's what cinema was already moving in that direction, but action films really got dirty and gritty and fierce.
in the 70s,
scary in a way. Like Clint Eastwood's character was very anti-hero as well. Like you didn't know which way he was going to go, and in Fistful of Dollars, you didn't know if he was good or bad.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like in that time period, you would think that you would see a lot of films based on the war, like as World War II had just happened, and you would think you'd start to see a lot of things influenced. And I guess in many ways, Bond was influenced a little bit by like that after the war thing. But then when Vietnam happened, you just got a shit ton of Vietnam films that were coming out that were kind of that were about that and kind of presented these like action-y type heroes.
I mean,
you had
there
like
were
Arnold,
definitely
you had
World War II films.
Sylvester Stallone that were like based connected to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little later on. Yeah, that's true. Like in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, but when they kind of became like action stars as opposed to like, villains.
They had war
or
films.
or
They definitely had
heroes or
war
whatever.
films.
Did we
earlier than
skip the
that.
70s?
No, we're in the 70s.
Yeah,
That's
well, you had
the
films
Western-
like
80s, I'm
Apocalypse
like-
Now.
No,
and-
he's just mentioning that. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a little bit later.
Well,
in the
you
80s.
had that. I just thought that was an odd time because I don't now like it was somehow like in the 80s, 90s. I started to see all these World War II films.
Yeah, I mean, because you had Patton in 1970. You had what else? There was like
That's true.
a bridge too far. Judgment at Nuremberg, not an action film, but that kind of like tackled what happened with the Nazis. Being
It did.
tried.
But it seemed like Hollywood wasn't interested in like making a realistic.
They were
take
very
on
patriotic in
World
a
War
way.
II.
Yeah, it was kind of probably. I would say a lot of the films.
I don't know
back
if it
in
was
the,
patriotic, but
in the 50s and 60s. It felt like the war films were very much more.
well, because I grew up with this idea that like Vietnam was far more brutal than World War II, and I've come to realize that that's completely false.
That's what I'm
World
saying,
War II is
because-
just as brutal. Any war is as brutal as any war.
Because by the time Vietnam War came out, it was like okay to have like an anti-war sentiment. Not okay.
It was
by
more
the government
accepted,
standard.
by
but, like,
Hollywood.
it was happening. World War II, it was not
Yeah.
that way at all. Also, there was a clear directive. Here's this evil guy. That's who we're going after. Who's trying to take over
Right.
the world? It was
In
a very
Vietnam, it was kind
it's
of
a
like,
very
who are
easy
we
concept to
fighting and
swallow.
why, yeah.
Vietnam War. It's like why are we fighting all these farmers who can barely wear clothes like they have
Well,
sandals
Viet Cong
on?
weren't farmers, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the guys fighting were farmers.
We didn't know who the
They
enemy
enlisted.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy, and it went on for like 13 years.
Yeah.
World War II, we only got in on it. When were we? 42, 3 years before it ended.
It was right after.
It'd be
Pearl
going on
Harbor.
since 39, I think, or whatever, or 41, or.
Oh, it was going on for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess Pearl Harbor was bombed in 41, and that brought us into the war. But again, Vietnam War went on for like 13 years
Yeah.
through like 3 presidents. It was crazy. But
Ridiculous.
yeah, so you definitely had war films and stuff like that. 70s, we had the 60s, 70s, we had these more gritty Western films, and you had like these guys like Sergio Leone kind of bringing this element
Yeah.
to it, and he was outside the U.S. system.
Yeah.
And he was able to bring. And Europe had always had.
Wasn't what's his name?
easier
Clint
way.
on
19
Rawhide? Clint Eastwood wasn't he?
Yeah,
on
he was in the
Rawhide?
show Rawhide.
Yeah, 1971 was when he had one of his most famous film, which was Dirty Harry.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, exactly. And this is that.
Which is
cop-
helping you, okay? It doesn't have to be all about you. Okay?
No, I'm letting
I'm
you.
just saying.
This is the
I'll let you
transition
take-
from the Western
Hey,
to.
I'll let you take it over. I'm just dealing
the
with a lot. I
wild-
got like an encyclopedia in my head regarding
I
these
know.
things right now. So I'm like, I know that's. I was gonna say that's good. Thank you for saying that because I was gonna bring up the cop films of the
It's not
70s.
about
We skipped over
Jesus
a lot
Christ.
of these. There were films
Cry
like
about it, why don't
Spartacus
you?
with Kirk Douglas. Also, we kind of
What was
skipped over
that?
that. Spartacus
Yeah,
with Kirk
Yeah,
Douglas.
that's true.
Spartacus, yeah.
That's true.
Considered an action-y
Yeah,
movie.
yeah. And speaking
This
of Kirk Douglas,
encyclopedia is lacking
Paths to
some-
Glory was a war film in 59, 58 or whatever,
Yeah.
and that was Kubrick.
When did
Paths to Glory with Kirk Douglas, who's 101 now, by the way.
Still alive, still
crap.
kicking.
101, 102. He just turned like 101 or 102.
when did
That's
Bora
awesome.
Bora Bora come out?
I don't know. So the 70s, obviously detective and cop things were always...
You had like Charlton Heston and Ben-Hur.
Yeah, you had the what do they call them? The sword and sandal flicks? Is that what they
Yeah,
call those?
yeah.
Yeah, Ben-Hur, which is a good one. They've remade that. That's been remade several times. That's also Cecil B. DeMille.
Yeah.
Ben-Hur?
Ben-Hur, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I feel
I
like
saw the. I
Wait,
actually-
no, that's not Cecil B. DeMille.
No, that's not.
No.
Yeah, that's why I was confused.
Yeah, he did 10 Commandments. Let's see.
there was like this
Ben-Hur.
large interest in like making these like epic films that were action
William
films,
Wyler, right.
but they weren't action films focused on an action star.
Exactly. That's what the difference was. Like the idea of like biceps and six packs were not a thing
Yeah.
back then. You didn't see it. I guess the only ones you really would have seen that because you had like your Robert Mitchums and even your Marlon Brandos or what. All these guys never really had their shirts off because it didn't look great. Like it was just like they just had regular soft bodies or whatever they were. They weren't looking at being
Soft
chiseled.
Regular
bodies.
soft.
They were
bodies.
normal people.
They were normal people like
and
us.
Society or Hollywood or whoever has decided that, I don't know what
They weren't
decided,
oiling them
but-
up back then until like Stallone and Schwarzenegger started getting oiled up. That's what
And
happened.
fights were different,
Like, let's
too.
be honest.
I mean, it was probably Schwarzenegger that brought that,
You know, it's funny
that
'cause
level of finesse.
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 Fitness.
Fitness.
Finesse. No, because if you look, okay, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but yeah, if you look at
Yeah.
Stallone from the first Rocky to the third Rocky, which was 76 to 82, very different look. He did not. He was not all shined up and like ripped or anything in the first one, but the third one he was, and he was being oiled up. It was the '80s look compared to the '70s.
Well,
look.
there's like
the third one was more about that oiled up look was part of the whole. He was winning fight setup. They were making him look grandeur.
Yeah, they were.
But I do know what you're talking
people
about.
That were almost going to die when they were fighting. Right, but no, I'm talking about the look. The third movie is the first Rocky film that really feels like an 80s film, whereas the first one.
I thought he was just sweating. I didn't think he was
but he's sweating in the first one, but he doesn't look like that. He doesn't look like oiled up, shiny with six packs and biceps like this. Like, but the third film and the fourth one, he looked like that because that was an 80s look by that point, 82 and 85. The 70s, it wasn't about that yet. Like this, even your Steve McQueen's, you didn't see these guys with like their shirts up because they had hairy chests or they didn't have six packs. It wasn't like about that. Right.
Right. There wasn't that much interest.
That's right.
In that particular aspect of an action star.
Right. It wasn't about being this big muscular, guy.
Yeah.
It wasn't about that.
I don't know. It is interesting because like I love Arnold, but like at the same time, like a lot of scenarios, I'm like, he's like too.
He's not fit for it.
Yeah, like he wouldn't survive well in that situation because he's just too bulky. He's just
bulky,
this like 300-pound guy lumbering around with all this muscle, and he's not. There's no. To me, somebody like Bruce Lee is more of an ideal thing because he could like run up a wall or climb a tree or like do a backflip, dodge a bullet, or something like that. Like versus Arnold, who would just get loaded up with bullets. Like where would he go? Where would he go?
He's not.
So the '70s is very interesting because
I love.
That's when action films really blew out, and you had
Death Wish.
so many different genres that had action in it.
The late 60s and into the 70s, the first movie to use the word fuck was in 1968. I swear to God it was going to be earlier than that, and I looked it up recently, and the first film was only 1968.
What was the film?
I can't remember. There's two films that year that used the F word. I can't remember what it was called.
Okay.
But just look it up. It's 1968. If you Google it, you'll see it. And I was surprised. I was like, really? I really thought maybe some movies, lower tiered movies or whatever were going to be using the F word before that, but no, not until 68. So that means cursing and violence and all that really started making its way into cinema in the late 60s.
It wasn't until
70s.
The 80s you had like a rating system, right?
No. It was back then.
So you had like PG and then it was like R.
Yeah, basically, which I think was maybe the 70s or late 60s that they set that. Or they always had some sort of system.
And then you had like
you had a no, you didn't even have a system. So, you're not allowed to do this in movies.
Yeah.
Before then.
Yeah, like if you had anything in your movie that they considered like too inappropriate, you would get a XXX rating.
Yeah. Then there was a whole court case about it in the 60s or whatever. It's like some New York Court of Appeals or whatever. They did this whole thing, which is like you got to stop fucking just like selling them. They can't do that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, Dirty Harry. You ever seen these Dirty Harry movies? Yeah. They stretch from 71 into the 80s.
So just to answer your question, MASH.
4 or 5 of them.
MASH
1970. It's a war. It's not really an action.
The Graduate. Oh, we're talking about fuck.
Oh, yeah.
The word.
The Graduate. No, there's another one before that. Graduate was 68.
Was it Ulysses?
Ulysses? Yeah, Ulysses was the first one. Yeah, that's it. Ulysses was the first movie to use the F word. And MASH was 1970, so that would have been a couple years later. But anyways, going back to action films, like this was the time period where it started breaking out of this stuff, and then a lot of young filmmakers that were part of like kind of like that more anti-culture, hippie, alternate kind of mentality started coming out. Your Martin Scorsese's, your Brian De Palma's, all these guys started coming out. But then you had like Dirty Harry is a fucking dark movie. Those movies are dark. They're violent. They're
you know what's interesting about that? Like I watched this film Zodiac recently, which we talked
David
about
Fincher.
for a little bit. Yeah, and I'm watching this movie, and there's like the movie is about the God, what is his name? The Zodiac killer or whatever.
Yeah,
and
from the 70s or whatever.
Yeah, out in San Francisco, there's these series of murders that occurred, and then all these letters kept getting written to this to different like newspaper outlets, and it just escalated. It went on for years, and it was like this interesting correlation. It was like there were these series of murders being committed. And then, these violent murders where this guy would just show up and he would just shoot somebody like multiple times or stab them multiple times. And these were real things that had occurred. And then in the film Zodiac, they go to, like, they never catch the guy.
Right.
At the end of the film, they kind of like indicate that they think it was this one guy, but he ends up dying before they can actually,
right.
Because of old age, he dies of like a heart attack or something.
Yeah.
And in the film, they go to see a movie that's kind of like a loosely spoof on this killer, and they still haven't caught the killer. So
Right.
the detective is there, Mark Ruffalo, who plays one of the lead detectives trying to hunt down this Zodiac killer in San Francisco with the San Francisco PD. And he's like, they've already made a movie about it. He's like, it's too late.
Right.
Like, if I haven't caught the killer by the time Hollywood makes a movie about it, it's over. And so I started to think, I was like, oh, you got all these dirty, hairy, these super violent movies, but you had violent crimes being committed in the 70s.
Oh, didn't they go to see Dirty Harry and Zodiac? That's the movie they go to see because the Scorpion killer in that movie was based off Zodiac, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of.
One
in
of
a
the
way. I
killers?
mean, he was that kind of a guy.
But in Hollywood, you win.
He's almost a copycat.
Yeah. Well, in that movie, it wasn't. They didn't mention the Zodiac at all, but he was sniping people from rooftops and shit like that. And he was crazy, and he was just going around. They were trying to track this guy
See,
down.
the difference is in the real world, you lose, but in Hollywood, you win.
Yeah.
Because they get the bad guy.
That's right. But Dirty Harry had some great quotes, like the one where he's like, Callahan, the mayor goes, Callahan, I don't want any more trouble like you had in the Fillmore district. Understand? That's my policy. And Harry, which is, Clint Eastwood goes, yeah, well, when an adult male chases a female with intent to commit rape, I shoot the bastard. That's my policy. And then he obviously has the famous line, a 45 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do ya? Punk. He grits his teeth. But it's a really, it's violent. It's fucking, I don't know. That ushered in this whole new gritty look to these cop films. Serpico, not particularly an action film, but it had that
French Connection.
French Connection, yeah. Bullet, I think, came out in 70 or something like that.
Assault on
Precinct 13.
Precinct 13, yeah.
Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Shaft.
Okay. Oh, well, if we're going to talk about that, then we got to talk about the 70s blaxploitation films. Which they were different genres. You had Blackula and stuff like that. But when you're talking about action film, Shaft, I love that film, original Shaft. Then he did Shaft Goes to Africa after that and everything. But that first film with Richard Roundtree, great action film. Again, action hadn't been refined as a choreographed look at that time. It was more just about these tough personalities, and it was about the story.
Yeah.
And whenever the action broke out,
seemed to be more
still felt kind of...
Yeah, Hollywood was still in this mode of the films were story focused, which goes back to its roots because these actors were they were paid employees of the studio.
Yeah.
These were not independent actors who could negotiate anything.
Well, they had contracts.
They had a contract
And
to
they were bound
for
to that
5 years
contract
you're
for
going
the
to you're going to act in any movie we goddamn tell you to act
It wasn't
in,
like
and
a thing
Yeah.
these days where it's like, oh, you're contracted to do 3 more Marvel films. No, it's like that's exclusively you're working for this studio. And
Yeah.
you got to be on loan from that studio to do anything else.
Yeah.
But the cool thing with action films that in the 70s, what they started letting loose. I always remember the French Connection, the car chase scene.
Oh,
and
yeah.
where it almost hit the lady
That
with
was
the
real.
baby.
Well, the baby part
Yeah,
wasn't
the baby
real,
wasn't
but
part.
that
Yeah.
a lot of that was completely they did that without permits.
One of the films that came out in that genre was Driver, which they
Let's see that.
Driver, which it came they
You mean recently? More recently?
Driver actually came out in 1970s.
Not Drive in the 70s.
Drive.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Is it Drive or
Drive
The
with
Driver?
Ryan Gosling, but that's like a few
No,
years
it was
ago.
the drive. It was the Driver.
The Driver. Okay,
The
from
Driver.
the 70s.
Yeah,
I never
it
saw
came out
it.
in the 70s.
Okay.
I think it was that film which they did a car chase in San Francisco, and
Oh, going down the hill?
going down the hills. I don't know if
Didn't
it
they
was
do that
Driver.
in Dirty? No, maybe they didn't do that in Dirty Harry.
No, it wasn't Dirty Harry. They had no.
I know the scene.
They had no permits. But if you rewatch the film,
They're going through intersections.
they're going around the same couple of blocks, and it's hilarious. Like if you really
If
watch
you
it,
know the neighborhood,
if you
too.
know the neighborhood, well, if you rewatch it, you'll see that they're going by the same houses.
landmarks.
But yeah, because they weren't getting permits. They
Right.
like you were saying, they weren't getting permits. They were like just run and shoot,
Guerrilla
guerrilla
style.
style.
Yeah.
It just go shoot.
I
the
think
scenes.
Bullet and French Connection were pretty much the influence on all car chases after that. Because there were car chases before that, but a lot of time it was faked or it was whatever. But those ones brought a reality and realism. And now, an action film can't be filmed without a car chase scene. They're like, okay, we need a car chase scene in this movie. It's kind of been overplayed, but those movies really made it this could be a high octane, high adrenaline rush. So the blaxploitation films, but the 70s was also when we started to see
Bruce
Bruce Lee. Kung Fu films.
He came out with 4 films in 3-year period.
Yeah, but they were all pretty much, except for Enter the Dragon, they were all in Hong Kong, and they didn't really get popular over here until after Enter the Dragon came out because he died. He died 2 weeks before Enter the Dragon came out.
Yeah.
And so when it
supposedly
hit, when it hit, it was a big hit, but it was even a bigger hit from the idea that this guy who's amazing and incredible just died. So they added this whole legendary status to it, mystery about it. So then all of his films came over here, you know, got dubbed and all these different things. Yeah. And those then became huge. You had Chinese Connection, Fists of Fury, you know, Way of the Dragon, which he directed. Game of Death. That was ridiculous. So Game of Death.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was in it. So that was the movie.
Crazy.
I know. He's fucking tall as shit in that compared to Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
But that was the movie that Bruce Lee was.
He was a student of Bruce Lee's, right?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, so was Steve McQueen, actually.
Steve McQueen,
and James Coburn. But so he was he wrote, directed, and starred in Game of Death, and he was in the middle of filming it when he died. Like, he went away to do Enter the Dragon, then he was going to return and complete Game of Death. And all he had really filmed were mainly the action scenes, like the final scenes in the pagoda, where he's going through the pagoda on these different levels, and at each level he meets another martial arts master of a different style, and he has to beat him to get to the top. And that's all he had filmed. So the studio, the Hong Kong studio, whatever, I think Golden Harvest, took the fucking film, and they did this crazy-ass thing where they got another actor to play Bruce Lee, and they brought him in, and he completed the thing, and then they used the original footage of Bruce Lee in there. Then they did stupid shit, like there was a scene
Sticky
where
face.
Yeah, they had Bruce Lee in a goddamn chair. Not Bruce Lee. They had the actor trying to play Bruce Lee in a chair, and they took a cardboard cutout face of Bruce Lee and they taped it to the mirror. So when he's sitting in a chair facing a mirror, and they taped it on the mirror, so they filmed at a certain angle to look like the cardboard cutout was over his head. And it's so fucking obvious that it's a cardboard cutout, and they left it in the goddamn completed film.
Yep.
Who has the balls to do that? And so they did that shit, and this is fucking Bruce Lee, and this Game of Death there's like 11 minutes of actual Bruce Lee and like 2 hours of this other bullshit they were doing.
It was crazy.
I saw that movie when I was a little kid because I was watching every Bruce Lee movie I can get my hands on. I didn't know what they were. It's just like, oh, here's the yellow box. I'm going to take this one and watch it. I was so confused. And it didn't take me until a few years ago when I researched all of the Game of Death. I was like, that's why I never understood this movie.
Yeah.
So anyways, that started Bruceploitation, where all these people were trying to cash in on the success of Bruce Lee, and all these people were coming out. Even Jackie Chan got in on the action, and they started basically being Bruce Lee type characters and releasing all these movies. And kung fu flicks fucking became huge.
Yeah, it was all new territory. I mean, people didn't really know if it was going to take off or it was going to be popular, and they started to see it become popular, and they're like, well, let's make more. Let's give the people what they want. Moviegoers
and this
what they want.
And this is just like what we're talking about is just early 70s, because when like the latter part of the 70s, 75 came out, that's when you start getting Star Wars. Mm-hmm. You start getting James Caan in roller derby or rollerball.
Yeah.
You start getting gosh, I'm trying to think of some other films.
Arnold and Terminator in the early 80s.
That was in the 80s.
That was
in
the
late
70s. Rocky
76.
Rocky
sure.
70. Yeah, Rocky came out in 76.
Yeah, it was a boxing movie, but you consider it like an action type movie.
That'd be an action film.
Yeah, a little different. Sports
There's
film.
some here. I'm trying to pop this list out here and just go.
I mean, you had like Steve McQueen in The Great Escape.
The Great Escape. Like again, action film kind of. But
Charles Bronson.
Clockwork.
All the Death Wish movies.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just talking about how dirty things are. Death Race or Death?
Death Race. Yeah, the Death Race 2000, but Death Race.
Death Race. Clockwork Orange.
Mad Max 79.
Mad Max. That's the one I was trying to think
Mad Max.
of.
Yeah, and then Road Warrior was in 81.
Yeah.
So this is this progression of films where you kind of had a cleaner kind of film, and then you started getting dirty and gritty in the 60s and 70s, mainly the 70s, and that all led to the 80s, where you have the rise of the action star, like people you expected action movies from. And they were more than just a face or a body, whatever. They were about biceps and glistening muscles.
I feel like with Arnold they were.
And Stallone. And Bruce Willis fucking had his shirt off for the whole... He was in a wife beater, and then he had his shirt off.
But Bruce Willis is like a little guy.
All right, I'm just saying.
Bruce Willis is like a musician. He's like a blues musician.
Dolph Lundgren. Yeah, I know.
Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, but Dolph Lundgren's first film was like Rocky IV.
Comedies.
So that was like his character. I mean, it made sense for him to do that.
But then Masters of the Universe and then Cover Up, and he did a shitload of movies. Dolph Lundgren was all action films, and Brandon Lee then came around. And
Oh,
was
don't
doing
forget Chuck
that.
Norris.
Chuck Norris, and then you had Jeff Speakman, which was another martial artist. They had all these martial arts movies then, and then you
Jean-Claude.
had Alex. What was that guy? The Dragon.
I recently watched this documentary that we both watched. I don't know if Diego, if you watched it, but it was
Electric Boogaloo: The Wild and Untold Stories of Canon Films.
yes, it's
On
on
Netflix.
Netflix.
So
if you
phenomenal.
have an hour and a half, go watch it. It's
great.
very interesting. There's a lot of nudity, so FYI.
So
but
definitely go watch it.
it's very interesting, and it basically follows these two guys who started Canon Films and the type of films they made. But it's interesting because I feel like their style, this like rushing, these low budget. Chuck Norris, Charles Bronson, American
Force
Ninja,
and, American
type
Ninja
action films, like they came from Canon Films, and they brought this level of like, I don't want to say like low quality, but it's almost like just like a winging it style of filmmaking where it was like poorly edited, poorly acted, explosions everywhere. Constantly things are blowing up, like stories don't make sense. Yeah. And they were just like, fuck it, release it.
The visual spectacle of it.
Yeah, and so that's kind of like what I think that influenced Hollywood a lot.
Yeah.
Even though people always consider them B movies, like I think that shifted the minds of like how action movies should play out.
Action films started being the blockbuster films of the time. Like they were everywhere. They became the dominant form of like eye candy in the movies. And it wasn't just about glistening muscles, but a lot of it had a lot of that element in it. It was about, and none of them were PG-13. They were all rated R.
Oh yeah, no.
All of them.
People get blown up.
They were about tough as nails motherfuckers coming in, cursing and blowing up and killing people. Like that was what it was. And Lethal Weapon films, Die Hard even, like, and they, some were better than others. Like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, absolute classics. If you want to go action comedy, you had the action comedy really introduced at that point with like Beverly Hills Cop, 48 Hours, these kind of movies, Yeah. So it really was. The 80s was the time period where action movies were embraced as a specific genre. Yeah. That was expected, and it was just, it was.
Well,
just,
you had, Jean-Claude Van Damme came on the scene.
Oh, Van Damme,
and Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
Even Steven Seagal.
Steven Seagal. So not much about the six pack, but like Van Damme, obviously.
Above the Law was
Above the
88.
Law was in the 80s, And it's Jean-Claude Van Damme, Muscles from Brussels. Like these were the guys coming out because the 80s afforded them a place. Because it didn't have to be about your acting or anything else. It had a little to do that. You had to have charisma and star quality power, but there was so much more to it. You had to basically convince men that you were better than them and bigger than you could kick their ass.
Yeah, and that actually also happened with like Lethal Weapon. It wasn't just about the muscles being on the good guy side. We actually had Lethal Weapon where you didn't have guys with muscle dealing with guys who were bigger, bulkier, faster, knew more, or were more articulate than them, were smarter, were were like Jet Li was in one of them, but that was that was in 97. That was in the 98. Yeah. But the bad guys were a lot more physically dominant than the good guys, in those films. So
Predator.
I mean, and you had characters, you had heroes that were like, there was more charisma than muscles.
Correct.
Like you had Harrison Ford in Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1981.
1981.
That.
Oh yeah.
He's not some beefcake running around.
He never was.
You know?
He's a bit of a soft body. I keep saying that because I'm just
saying.
No, when I say
I don't
that,
say hard body or soft body. I just say beefcake.
I do.
Oh wow.
No, I mean when I say soft body, I mean like you never see them with their shirt off with the ripped abs, whereas you've seen.
He's
Stallone
not a martial artist.
and
He's
Sylvester-
not. So Sylvester Stallone is like into physical fitness. Like he was
he's-
already a
you
big
had
guy when he did
Schwarzenegger,
Rocky.
yeah.
You know what I
Conan
mean?
also came out in the 80s.
Yeah, 81, 82. The Conan the Barbarian, then Destroyer was 84.
82.
And then Destroyer was 84, right? 85.
But then you had Kurt Russell in Big China.
Yeah, Big Trouble in Little China. Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't the muscle bound. He
Snake.
was more of a
Snake
Snake Plissken.
He was more of a soft body.
Snake from New York.
Soft body, yeah.
Was he a soft
I feel like I sound like somebody doing an interpretation of Trump.
But Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was
That's what you
that
sound
they
like.
brought back that serial action adventure.
Yeah.
With
And that
Raiders
was
of the Lost Ark.
George Lucas and Spielberg.
Yeah, it's
Everyone
Bob-
forgets that George Lucas was
very
a
much involved in
co-creator
it.
of Indiana Jones.
It was his
Like,
story originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he was the one that wanted to bring back and
Yeah, he did more than Star Wars universe. He also gave us Indiana Jones and Howard the Duck. Don't forget that.
Oh, you know what came out like in the 80s? That one movie of Sylvester Stallone I truly love.
Over the Top.
Oh, you're
Did
good.
I get it?
You're so good to me.
Over the top.
Over the top.
Arm wrestling.
Arm
It was
wrestling.
in Canon Films. They talk about it in that documentary, the Canon Films documentary. They're like,
I've never
how the
seen
hell-
it, but I'm
What?
familiar.
They were
with
like,
what you're
oh,
talking about, yeah.
because they made breakdancing popular on a commercial level with that movie Breaking.
Breakin',
That was
yeah.
like their breakout film. And they were like, okay, let's find another obscure kind of sport kind of activity thing. And they're like, oh, arm wrestling. Let's do a movie about that. I love the movie.
Check
A
this
movie
out. Check this-
about
Apparently
arm
didn't do
wrestling.
well.
Check this out. Great
That's
movie.
awesome.
That was like one of the first films where they actually included like interview style of the characters
Oh, at
into
the end.
films. Yeah, in the last fight, they were talking
Yeah.
about how they're going to deal with the other person, and I
They
just
were-
remember
it was-
Arnold.
yeah, it was like a
I remember
few- yeah.
Sylvester Stallone doing the speech. Like, oh no, I turn my head, everything just turns on, and I just do it. You know?
Because he always takes his
he takes his
trucker
hat
cap
and-
and he puts it backwards right before he's going to start arm wrestling. You're like, oh, shit. What was his name? Hawk. Lincoln Hawk.
Lincoln Hawk, yeah.
Great name.
And his truck
Lincoln
had a
Hawk.
hawk on it. What was the song with that? Meet me halfway.
That's right. Total 80s
Across
cheese.
the sky. Yeah. Oh
Sounds
my God.
amazing.
Heck yeah.
Have you not seen this movie?
I've never
It's on
seen it.
Netflix.
What is
I've
wrong
never
with
seen it.
you?
He basically...
Get on there.
I don't want to get too
I've
much
never
into
been
it.
big into arm wrestling though, so I thought.
Dude, you should
has?
watch this movie.
Who
you
has?
literally, this is specifically talking about where the bad guy is such like a
Robert
bigger.
Loggia.
Yeah, he's
Logia.
huge. He's super huge guy.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
that bad guy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
no.
No, the grandfather is kind of like the piece of shit bad guy. He basically goes to pick up his kid, who he's never really had a relationship with, from a prep
Yeah.
school, and he's going to bring him home, but the kid doesn't want to go with him. He's going to drive him in his truck home because his mom, the kid's mom and his ex-wife, is dying in the hospital, and she just wants him to have a relationship with his actual father. So it's kind of like a real story there, too. And But the grandfather, which is her dad, is like this big businessman, like executive, like he's rich and whatever, and he wants the kid to have nothing to do with this trucker piece of shit father in his eyes. So he's sending people to try and get the kid away from him, and he's traveling across the country, and the kid's starting to open up and stop being a little snobby piece of shit.
Yeah.
And he starts getting into it. Anyway, it's really
It's
a great. I love
film.
the fucking film.
I love
it. It's the greatest arm wrestling film of all time.
It's the blood sport of arm wrestling.
It's the greatest arm wrestling film of all time.
Okay, there's
bar
no-
none. There's
okay.
nothing better.
All right, so there's a lot of films, and I feel like we could keep going on. So we might have to split into two pieces.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we do.
This is the evolution of action movies, part 1.
Yeah, so we came into this thinking we could do this in one episode, but it's not gonna happen.
I was trying to
There's
speed
just so
through
many.
these things.
Yeah.
I was trying to speed through these movies.
And I feel like we try to do it too fast, and we skipped a lot of great films, which it's okay.
Yeah.
But I think we should cut it at 80s. And
Yeah,
then we'll
we'll
do
pick
a
it up in the
different-
90s.
We'll pick it up in the 90s and stuff, because there was a big change in the 90s,
Yeah, there's
which
like
we could take
28
it from there.
years there to look
Oh yeah,
at.
in the 80s.
Exactly.
I mean, you had like so many people. Like Eddie Murphy became an action star.
action
Mel,
comedy, yeah.
Mel Gibson became an action star in the 80s.
Yeah,
I
Mad
mean,
Max, we talked about that.
Yeah.
Bruce Willis became
With
an action
Weapon.
star. He was like
Die
a
Hard.
comedian.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
You
was
know,
he
before, and-
moonlighting. He was in that sitcom Moonlighting.
Yeah.
And he was a stand-up, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you went from Chuck Norris and all. There's so many people in
There
there.
are. So
Yeah.
we could touch upon those a little bit more in the next episode too, and we'll start at 90s, but if we want to go back and backtrack and just kind of,
We'll connect it.
Yeah, we'll
We'll
connect
connect it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you guys for joining us at Get to the Podcast. That's Get to the Podcast with the number 2. My name is Diego D'Souza.
I'm Nick Gambino.
And I'm Neil Carson.
Meet me halfway. Across the sky. There you go.
You don't know.
What the
I don't know.
world
I don't know.
belong to you.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.